What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Absolute Batman, and holy cow. Dude, this Absolute Batman is phenomenal. This is the best Batman's been for quite some time in DC Comics. So, what this does here is this initially picks up seemingly in the aftermath of everything with Bruce's dad being killed. Right. And of course, he's basically there with Leslie Tompkins, which is kind of cool to see that Leslie's such a long-standing figure in Bruce's life. Now, she's not really the behind the scenes helping the, superheroes deal with their injuries type of nurse, because again, we don't really know if Absolute Superman, Absolute Wonder Woman, Absolute Batman, if they all share the same reality. I'm curious to see when that crossover happens, and I'll be excited when it does, if it ever does. But still, she's still there as just kind of a support figure in Bruce's life, right? So she basically, inoculates him, right, in order to make sure that he's not infected by any rabies or anything like that when it comes to bats. And, at the end of the day, it kind of switches over momentarily to this funeral for his dad. And that's one of the things that kind of goes on with Absolute Batman, right? It bounces back and forth between the death of his father and how Bruce, kind of copes and all that kind of stuff. But at that point, we jump to the present day. Now, at the end of the last video, what Bruce had essentially done was taken a bribe, a $200 million bribe. The idea is that he would stand down temporarily and he would do nothing to stop the party animals, right? This rogue group that basically took up residence in Gotham and is, causing all kinds of pandemonium and mayhem. And that during that time, they would just be allowed to operate essentially with impunity, because as it stands right now, the cops can't really do anything to stop him. And even if the cops could stop them, most of the cops in Gotham seem to be on the take. So they have no real reason to stop them. As long as the coffers stay full, there's no reason to act. And so you get this really cool monologue from Alfred, because remember, he's a mercenary who's really here kind of monitoring Batman more than anything. And he says, Batman revs the engine as he rounds 27th, revs it louder at 39th, taunting them to try him. But they all just watch and they let him pass. Because remember, it's kind of a ceasefire, right? Batman stays away, they stay away from Batman, and they do their own thing. And he says, look at him. He's daring them to blow up the deal. Some part of him wants them to, I'm sure. But the bike has a tracker. Watching that dot, I half expect him to do it himself. Drive right past the meeting spot, but he doesn't. Instead, he stops right where he's supposed to and goes into the building. Now, the crazy thing about this, and this is what's kind of wild here, is that Alfred supports the decision that Batman's making. Even though, again, the two of them rarely ever have any contact and Alfred's monitoring him, Alfred's handlers hit him up and say, we have everything that we need. It's time for you to bail out. And the idea behind Alfred's mentality here is that Bruce taking the money and standing down will momentarily put Gotham in jeopardy. But what it will also allow is for the handlers of Alfred to gather information, essentially building a case. And that when that happens, they can take all that information, round up the party animals, and then ideally bring them to justice. But as we're going to see, things kind of take a bit of a different turn, because at that point you switch back over to Jim Gordon, right, as he's having a conversation with Bruce Wayne's mom. Now, of course, again, Bruce Wayne's mom is very politically active. She did survive, right? She wasn't there when Bruce's dad was killed at the zoo and all that kind of stuff. And again, we'll do a bit of a refresher here in a second for those of you guys who need it, in case you're, a little forgetful about what happened. But ultimately, where Gordon was running for mayor, he essentially lost against Mayor Hill. And Mayor Hill, as he's shown here, is essentially a very corrupt guy, right? He is working with the party animals. And one of the big things that he had done is they had shut off the light, a kind of memorial that goes on every year on the anniversary of the massacre at the zoo, which cost Bruce Wayne's father his life. But this time it's not being done. And it's one of these small little instances where it's almost an Animal Farm type thing, right? Well, we're going to make this change. We're going to make that change. But the changes are in the benefit of everybody, right? And before you know it, the pigs are dressed like animals and the horses sent off to the glue farm. If you never read Animal Farm, it's one of the most phenomenal books of all time. But the bigger point and the message that it sends out here is that little by little, small things that kind of create a unified society in Gotham are being removed. So you can have a divided society. Because a divided society is much easier to conquer and control than a united one. And so with this whole thing unfolding and seemingly Gotham falling apart at the seams, even if only on a political level, Jim Gordon tells, Martha that he's sorry, right? That this thing kind of stinks. And Martha sort of hits him up and is like, hey, look, sometimes these things are unfavorable, right? Sometimes it just works out that way. And they have a little bit of a conversation back and forth about the first time that they met. that Martha was basically protesting. Jim Gordon had actually arrested her, and then when he was supposed to book her, he let her go and then gave her money for a new sign. And she says, my point to telling you all of this and going down memory lane is that yes, most times in Gotham, people surprise you in awful ways, but sometimes, once in a blue moon, they surprise you in good ones too. Now get up, because we still have a battle to fight. Just because he's the mayor doesn't mean that we still can't have some measure of an impact on Gotham. And Jim Gordon's response here is a really interesting one. He's like, I get what you're saying and I appreciate that, but you misunderstand. I was talking about the zoo, the memorial light that happens every year. I'm sorry they're not lighting it this year because honestly, I told Bruce that we would. I'm essentially breaking a promise. And that's when you jump back, right, to Bruce having a conversation with Jim Gordon when Bruce is a little kid. And it's kind of interesting because Jim sits down with Bruce and he's like, I'm not really good at this kind of thing, right? I'm not good at the emotional stuff and the lovey-dovey type thing, right? Being vulnerable and exposing his feelings, but he says, I wanted to say, I've seen a lot of brave acts in my life, but I haven't known very many brave people. Your dad, he was one of them. He sort of shone with it, right? I see that when I look at you too. And he's like, I'll let you go, but I also wanted you to know that they're going to tear down the zoo. And Bruce asks, like, what are they going to put here? And he's like, I don't know, maybe something practical, but you won't have to look at it ever again. It'll be gone for good. And it's interesting, right? Because it makes sense to some degree, right? And again, kind of a refresher here with the death of Bruce's dad. The way that played out is that instead of Bruce Wayne's parents being killed in Crime Alley and a mugging gone wrong, there was basically a shooting at a zoo. Now, again, we still don't have a lot of the details. We don't really even know why it happened. A lot of it kind of seems to be Snyder building up the idea that it was a senseless act, but it may not be, right? There may be a whole plot device behind why this incident happened. But the long and short of it is that where Bruce's dad was a teacher and Bruce was in class with his dad, the trip to the zoo came as a reward for winning an engineering contest. So it was, by all standards of measurement, this incredibly happy moment. But the shooting takes place, Bruce's dad gets all the kids to safety, and he dies trying to keep them protected. Bruce's mom was a social worker. And so, of course, she wasn't there at the time. But again, the whole thing impacted them both. And Bruce has carried it with him this entire time. And so what you do is you kind of jump back to the present moment, right? And again, Alfred is narrating this and he says, here we go. A few more moments and this fever dream will be over and Batman will be something lasting, something applicable. For a moment, his back tenses, almost imperceptible, but I catch it. Now, what Alfred's talking about here is actually something that you wouldn't necessarily expect, but makes perfect sense. In a city like Gotham, people don't solve their own problems. People wait for someone to come along and rescue them from their problems. And while that can be beneficial in a way, right? I mean, people oftentimes are not necessarily equipped, at least individually, to solve incredibly complex problems on a societal level. It also becomes a problem because you're always waiting for someone to save you. And when there's no one there to save you, then you're just kind of left to your own devices, and unprepared and ill-equipped, you fall prey to whatever your circumstances may be. And in this instance, with Batman basically vacating, right, walking away, it's going to turn Gotham into a terrible place with the party animals running rampant. But what Alfred's betting on here, and what he's talking about, right, that Batman will be applicable in something lasting, is that the citizens of Gotham will become more and more desperate. And in becoming more and more desperate, they will cry out for virtually anyone to save them. And with no cops doing it, Batman, at the end of this whole ceasefire, will finally be able to act again. And the people will welcome him with open arms. They'll do it out of desperation, but they'll do it nonetheless. And they'll praise his name as the savior of the city. It's very game theory-esque, right? What do you do when the success of your decisions depend on the decisions of others? And if you know that if you let a terrible thing happen, that it'll either unite people or it'll give people pause to look at you in a favorable light when you come along and save them, why not let it happen? Right? I mean, at the end of the day, you win and they will ultimately win. They just don't have the foresight to see it. But it is also a very manipulative tactic to take. And so again, kind of focusing on all of this, Alfred says, look around. Do you feel that? They're all jealous of you because you did it. You won. You don't know that you've won, but you won. And that's when Black Mask comes out, right? The leader of the party animals, and just kind of tells him, man, like, you're going to be rich, right? Like, we transferred the money to this account, right? One anonymous account to another anonymous account. You're $200 million richer. But also keep in mind, this is Batman, right? Batman's not going to just abandon the city of Gotham, no matter how hopeless the city may be to somebody like you or I. And he says, I know. I already used it on something. And Roman's just kind of like, wow, I mean, okay, cool. Like what'd you use it on, man? You know, like you buy cars, planes, bat computers, or like, what'd you use it for? And he's like, how much of it did you use? And Bruce is like, I used it all. I used every single cent of it, every single dollar. And what he did is he took all the money that he was given and he put it in the form of a bat. And then he put it on the memorial spotlight at Gotham Zoo. And then he turns it on. Now, it is cool the way this thing transpires because there's this moment, right, where it's kind of a flashback to when he was younger and he stops Gordon. He says, no. I don't want them to knock down the zoo and I don't want them to turn it into something practical. I want something there that makes everyone look, like you said, something that shines. And so again, that's where the memorial came from. But when Batman turns this thing on, it's a giant bat signal in the sky, right? In the shape of his, absolute Batman insignia. Now, I do love this because again, Batman in the absolute universe, this is Batman running on a shoestring budget, right? This is Walmart Batman. Right? This is Batman from the threshold aisle in Target. This guy doesn't have all the money in the world. He doesn't have all of Wayne Enterprises and, $1 billion at his disposal. He's running on a very, very tight string here, yet he still manages to make it work. And that's why when he fires the light up, it's basically his way of saying, I'm not going to go through with this, right? Like I am going to stay Batman. And that's when Roman says the deal's off, right? And he says, see, Roman, I don't need cars or planes or computers. I don't need anything that you have. All I need is Batman. And he immediately takes it to all of Roman's guys. And when I say takes it to him, I mean, it's brutal. Sure, he doesn't necessarily kill, but he makes these guys regret everything, right? Some dude comes running at him with a missing hand and a meat cleaver. Batman takes this guy apart. And the crazy thing is when he goes to attack him, right? Batman's armor activates and it creates these giant spikes that impale this guy, right? So he's like literally Batman's got this dude on his back, just kind of like flailing around, begging for his life while Batman's beating the crap out of all these other guys. It's amazing. Right? It's phenomenal. And things like this really make me feel like this is incredibly similar to like Flashpoint Batman, right? Thomas Wayne as Batman, who's incredibly brutal. He doesn't really take prisoners. He doesn't really ask questions. He uses a gun and he's got no qualms against killing. It's a very hardcore thing. Now, again, Batman has his no-kill rule, which is still maintained here. And ultimately, that becomes his weakness. Right? And it's usually something that's exploited by some of Batman's most capable villains. And one of the things he says here, as he's essentially taken out all these guys, he says, all the crime the party animals committed, all the arson, the robbery, the murders, it was manufactured by you, so you and your boss could profit. You don't care how many people die. And this is a phenomenal thing here. Instead of some grandiose speech, right, by Black Mask. And it's like, actually, Batman, and here's my whole plan. And he's like, nope. But fortunately, though, you do. Open fire. And like all his guards, right, that are on these rooftops, these snipers start shooting all the other guys who are here because Black Mask was taking this precaution. There was some part of him that believed that Batman would betray the deal in some capacity. And to have some measure of a safety plan here, right, to essentially put his own guys in the line of fire, Batman's just like, no, you can't do this, and starts going after and trying to save these guys. While he's doing that, Black Mask fires off a net and captures Batman. Batman's kindness and his no-kill rule become his weakness. And this is when you get to probably one of the greatest statements in a Batman comic that I've read in quite some time, right? That Black Mask sits down with Batman, right? Like he just kind of sits down and has this conversation and he says, man, you had it too, right? Like all right there, that ticket to the big party, all you had to do was reach out and grab it. And where Batman goes to grab Black Mask breaks his arm. And he's like, now what do you have? And Bruce's response is like, I have just what I wanted. Everything that you said here, everything that you confessed to, it's already at every news station in Gotham. And the response of Black Mask is like, my God, you actually believed you achieved something here, don't you? Like you really do believe you've done that, right? And even like the woman he's with is just kind of like, I think he really does. I think he really does believe he's achieved something. And the response of Black Mask is like, me too. Like, that's crazy. He believes that burning the cash, exposing the truth, that it's going to inspire people, right? He thinks that he's the hero in all of this. He's like, I hate to tell you, pal, you're not even the main character. Like, no one cares. Because the reality is that the people in the city of Gotham wanted the city to be better. You wouldn't be necessary, right? They don't necessarily want it to be bad. They just don't care enough to make it good. And he says the only hero of this story is money, Batman. That's it. That's the only hero here. It's the only thing that really matters. So they literally beat the crap out of him and kick him off the side of the building. And he's like, now I'm going to prove it to you. I'm going to prove to you that these people in Gotham really don't care. Right? That the city's this bad because the people want it this way and they let it get this way. It's very indicative of the Joker from The Dark Knight, right? Like, I will prove it to you. This city will eat itself alive, right? That kind of thing. Now I'm paraphrasing. I don't remember the Joker's exact words, but the fact is, right, that like Batman comes crash landing down and the cops are coming after him because remember, he's still a vigilante in the city of Gotham. So the cops are coming after him. They're shooting at him. It's like a scene for Batman Mask of the Phantasm. He ends up coming across Barbara Gordon, again, who's like a beat cop at this point in time. She almost goes to arrest him, but then chooses not to. Right? She ends up letting him go. Because again, much like Jim Gordon, she knows that Batman can have a positive effect on the city of Gotham. And while she's not enough to turn the entire tide of the police that want to track him down, whether because they're on the take or because what he's doing is against the law, at the end of the day, it's just kind of like this guy can do more good than harm. And so she lets him leave. And then you switch again to like this phenomenal statement, right? Because Black Mask addresses the city of Gotham through the news. And he's like, my name is Roman. A little about me. I grew up on a pig farm. Humble beginnings, I know. One of my jobs on the farm was to kill the pigs when the time came. I used one of those captive bolt pistols, 5-inch pin right in the head. Most times it was just thunk and then down. But once in a while, on rare occasions, the pig would have this kind of spasm, not of pain, but of joy. It was wild. It let out this moan and then shiver and even smile with blood spurting out of its head. I learned later that this only happened if the pin got deep enough to hit this tiny little spot in the brain called the hedonistic hub, the main pleasure center. And that only occurred if the pig didn't tense up when the pin hit, but just relaxed and accepted it. If the pig did, the hub would literally flood the last bits of its brain with total unchecked pleasure. This split second of ecstasy that only came with the acceptance of death, which brings me to now, this moment, because come on, we all feel it. The big guys, they killed the world long ago, and yet they keep us all slaving away with the promise that it's all still alive. I mean, admit it, you can barely pay your bills while their money makes money. You drag recycling to the curb while they ride private jets that tear the sky apart. You struggle to hold this system together that does nothing for you, doing the right thing so they can do the wrong one. Why? I'll ask again, why? Now, this right here, it's a phenomenal monologue. This is incredibly indicative of Batman the White Knight. How many of you guys remember that story from Sean Murphy? Arguably the greatest Batman story ever written of like the last decade and a half. It's a phenomenal Batman story. I think we covered all 3 parts, although maybe we didn't do Batman, was it Batman White Knight Beyond or whatever it was, but it was amazing. And one of the things that happens in that story, kind of the main gist of that story, is that Batman forces Joker to take pills that make him sane. And when that happens, Joker ends up filing a lawsuit against Batman, the city of Gotham, for abuse, different things like that. But he starts revealing these things, like the Batman Devastation Fund, that when Batman gets into a conflict with some villains, that part of Gotham usually loses its value when it comes to homes because nobody wants to move there. The rich come in, they buy it all up, and when interest in that area starts to come back about, they sell it for like top dollar. But that whole thing is predicated on the vigilante nature of Batman. And while Batman didn't know, the argument of Joker is, how could you not? Right? You're a billionaire industrialite in the city of Gotham. How do you not know something like that's going on? And while this isn't necessarily a one-to-one replication of that, what it does do is it throws into sharp relief the idea that within the city of Gotham, things are bad, but partly because people let it get that bad, and partly because there were some circumstances out of their control. So why even put up with it at all? Why deal with it at all? And more so than that, it paints this picture, looking at guys like Commissioner Gordon and Batman, that much like in Batman the White Knight, Batman's not there to protect the, poor and downtrodden from abusive systems, that Batman's there to protect the abusive systems from the poor and the downtrodden. And cops are essentially kind of the same way. That's the image that was painted in the White Knight, and it's almost the image that's being painted here. All those guys out there, the cops, the ultra rich, so on and so forth, those are the bad guys. Why do you continue to be a part of all of this? It's a phenomenal way to kind of display this idea of Gotham in a manner that we hadn't really considered before. And so when Bruce Wayne gets back to what passes for the Batcave, truth to tell, that Alfred's there and he's like, why don't you help me out and get me stitched up? And Alfred's like, you have no idea what you've done, do you? Right? Like, you're so short-sighted. You think in the short term. You think in the moment. You never think like 6, 7, 8 moves down the line. You never ask yourself the question, if I do this, then what comes next? And he's like, what you've done here is you've made a martyr out of this guy. You've given this guy all the reason he needs to beseech the people of Gotham and actually get them to rise up against their own city and tear their own city apart. Because that's what he says, right? Like in this continued monologue, Black Mask says, I say enough, because all those ideals, those dreams you're toiling for, they're dead. Progress is dead. History is dead. Truth is dead. So how about we all just admit it's dead and relax so the pen can just hit that sweet little spot. Let's all live in that one split second of ecstasy, feast on the giant scraps. And because Batman turned down his invite, I'm offering invitations to all of you. Hundreds of millions of dollars, all up for grabs. And seemingly his argument is all you have to do is go seek it. And so again, it's kind of a blend of a combination of Batman story arcs we've seen over the years. Batman the White Knight, The Dark Knight Rises from Christopher Nolan, introducing chaos, introducing pandemonium, turning the city over to the people who are ill-equipped to govern it on their own without any real leadership, and watch them tear the city apart as they only think in the short term, never thinking in the long term. But the question is, will they? Or are the people in Gotham a lot more hopeful than we've initially been led to believe? I'd like to hope that it's the latter. I'd like to believe that Gotham's not really that bad. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Again, right, Absolute Batman is phenomenal. It's an incredible story. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.